role. Find out what they want and their positive intention. Leave it there. Break state. Come back. Now the observer has new information. What does the observer now recommend to the self? Okay. Have the self try it and the observer watch. See, is this possible to get you what you want? If not, try something else. When it's something you think they might want, they go back into self, get into their posture again, I statements. Imagine trying it out with this person. Notice how that feels. If it feels good, ask all the parts if that's okay, and he just kept nodding. Yeah, it took him a while to get into it. It's okay. Check it out. Does it satisfy the positive intention? Yes, you're done. If not, you go back to observer position. What might he try differently? So he's had one practice of something. Maybe he'll alter it a little bit. When you get something that looks good, again, go back in here, try it out. You end up here when it's what his positive intention is satisfied. There are some circumstances in which you're not going to get all of it, especially if this person is truly limited. It's better and it's closer to the positive intention. It allows that flexibility. Okay? This is described in your book. And if you're in chairs, you can move several chairs around, or spaces, you move around to them. Let them have their experience. Just make sure they break state from going to either one of the associated states into the observer state. Okay? Let's meet back here in 1/2 hour. Go have fun. Welcome back. Make sure that as you come back, you are either transitioning from observer to self, or you're in self. Okay? I know that some of you didn't get the opportunity to either experience this as or you got partway through it. I have a recommendation that you get with that person that you were with and finish this weekend sometime, because this is really valuable. I talked to the coaches too, and if people need it during the next study group, you'll get an opportunity to try this. Okay? All right. Do you remember this?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you feel kind of like that right now?
Yeah.
A little altered in the end of your 3rd week. It's an amazing time for you. And I will be leaving you physically after this week. I will not be leaving you in my heart. I will be in your heart as well. And I will be in your minds, whether you like it or not. You will hear me on occasion. And it's possible that I will become a part of you that will remind you always to look at your positive intentions and the positive intentions of others. And thank you for being a part of my life in the last several weeks and teaching me so much and giving me the opportunity of growing as much as I did. And I have a task for you, several tasks. If you have not finished your feedback form, there will be a man at the door. And there he is. And remember all of the little reminder signs there about mind mapping class, about the modeling presentation tonight. Safeway at 7:15. Dance in Granby. A dance. And this will remain here. Chris is the keeper of this. And so next week it will be with you as well. You get to meet Adam Reynolds next week. I don't think you have met him yet, no? I believe he's our youngest trainer, yeah? In the group, we're all a bunch of oldies. He's the youngest. I've known Adam since he was a wee lad. And so he'll be with you to talk about metaphors and how to detect when people are using them and what it might mean, and then what do you do to install wonderful metaphors. And this is very useful in personal life as well as business. Businesses have metaphors. And it's a fascinating topic. And then you'll get 3 days of Charles in pulling it all together. Pulling it all together. So, your final task after you hand your feedback forms to Chris, if you have not already, is to go have a really great weekend and let all of this integrate on its own, because it will. And I hope to see you again someday.
So the final week. Have you ever done anything like this before in your life? Some extraordinary experiences, I hope, in these last 3 weeks. Some eye-opening experiences, some awakenings. Yeah? Excellent. Let me start by introducing myself. I'm Adam Reynolds. Let's see, my history, NLP history. My parents both took NLP training. So I was one of the first children of NLPers, so to speak. Both, they took it in 1980 and 81 when Stephen Connery and Andreas were first starting NLP trainings. I think the first one was in 1979. So my folks were in on it at the beginning. And I think I was 16, thereabouts at the time. And so I sort of began to get NLP by osmosis. I remember sitting in a restaurant one time when my sister was having some kind of a phobic response to something, and my dad doing the phobia process, sitting there with her in the restaurant and going, "That's quite odd. What is that? What is he doing?" And so those were the early days when NLP was just beginning, just being formed. After, of course, years that Bandler and Grinder were sort of exploring with Erickson and Satir. Have you heard a lot of the history already? You know the history? Some of the trainers have talked about Bandler and Grinder, I hope. Yes? A little bit of Erickson talk, a little bit of Fritz Perls, a little bit of Virginia Satir. Sort of hearing about the origins, where it all started. That was back in the early 70s when Richard Bandler was a student of John Grinder's at the University of Santa Cruz. Grinder was a linguistics professor, which is why we have such an odd name for the field, neuro-linguistic programming. That's a Grinderism, I do believe. Anyway, so after my early beginnings in NLP by osmosis, I actually decided to go to work for the company while I was doing my last class in history in the history of psychology at the University of Colorado. And I discovered during my years in college trying to learn psychology that they didn't teach actually a lot about how people worked. They taught a lot of theories, they taught you a lot about rats and what rats do, but not a lot about what people do and how people think, and how their thinking creates their emotions, and how their emotions cause their actions. And so when my parents said, well, maybe you want to go try NLP, I thought, well, really I want to go be a ski bum for a while. So I thought, I'll just work in a restaurant, and they really encouraged me to go work for Stephen, Connie, Ray Andreas. And I'm most grateful for that nudging, because it really began something that has opened many, many doors for me, and has been an exploration that has been very, very rich and very meaningful in my life. As Chris said, I now practice as an NLP therapist. I do hypnosis. I work in business with doing consulting as well as executive coaching. And I've worked with people from all over the world. I've worked with people who are interested in many different things. I've worked with educators. I've worked with children trying to learn. I've worked with athletes on performance. I've worked with singers and dancers and musicians. I've worked with PhD students who are trying to focus on their studies and who are having difficulty staying focused. I've worked with many people who have fears of flying, people who have fears of all kinds of things. Claustrophobia and fears of needles. I remember my first opportunity to try the trauma process was a friend of mine was going into the military. And you know, when you go into the military, or at least for some of you who you have to get a lot of shots. Well, the last time he'd had a shot was about, 5 or 6 years before that. And he had such a major phobia response that he'd lost bowel control, he threw up, he had all kinds of major physiological responses. And I thought, I've never done this before, but what the heck? I think I know the process pretty well. So in 20 minutes, I took him through the process, and I found that when I first tested it with him, all I had to do was go like this, and he would start having the response. He would start panicking, just by acting as if this was a needle and I was going to poke him with it. And you could really see him start to shift. His breathing changed, his body temperature changed, you could see color in his face, and he would turn away. Well, after 20 minutes of doing the process, it was like, and there was nothing. And it was like, and still nothing. And so then I had him imagine actually going in and getting a shot, and so on and so forth. And it was truly an amazing experience for me. A test of a process and something that I didn't feel like I knew very well, and yet it worked. And he wrote me a few weeks after that and said that he had over 10 shots and he didn't have any problem with it whatsoever. Now, he did have what they call, anticipatory anxiety. Have you heard that? Did Steve talk about that when he was doing the phobia? That sometimes when you've had a response and then the phobia process has been done and you've made the change, sometimes you still have an anticipatory anxiety about maybe having the response. Does that make sense? So he thought he might have the response. And yet the anxiety went away pretty quickly. Another example of an experience for me, which was years and years later of the same process, but a much more evolved way of using it, where I began to discover the actual sort of structure, what was happening with the phobia trauma process. And it was just a few years ago when I was mountain biking, and I was going downhill way too fast, and I hit a nice little sort of dip in the road, and I ended up in the air, lost my bike, it flew to the side, and I was traveling in the air and did a front handspring off my arms and broke both my arms. I broke my thumb, broke my wrist, I broke this radius, and I broke this radius. And so I did the trauma process while I was lying there in the trail. While my friend was off riding down the trail, I'm laying there, okay, I got to get calm here, I got to focus. And I found that when I went back to ride again after